What would you do if a stranger on a midnight bus held your child, calmed her tears, and quietly changed your life forever? The bus groaned to a stop on a freezing New York night, brakes hissing like the sigh of the city itself. Amelia Carter stepped on with her daughter, Grace, bundled tight against her chest in a worn fleece jacket. It had been a 10-hour shift at the diner, and Amelia's bones ached with exhaustion. Her arms tightened around her sleeping child as she scanned for a seat. She found one near the back, wedged between a window streaked with grime and an older man already dozing with headphones in. Grace whimpered slightly in her sleep. Amelia soothed her with a soft hum, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Could you maybe hold your kid tighter or something?" "She's taking up the whole seat." The voice came from behind her, sharp and annoyed. Amelia flinched. She turned slightly, whispering, "I'm sorry." "She's just sleeping. Before she could adjust, Grace let out a cry. Not just a whimper this time. A full-throated wail that sliced through the quiet of the bus like glass. Amelia's heart sank. The bus driver glanced in the rearview mirror, clearly annoyed. "Ma'am, can you quiet her down? People are trying to get home." "I'm trying," Amelia pleaded, bouncing Grace gently in her arms. The cold from the night clung to her coat, her fingers numb, her feet throbbing. She'd been up since sunrise, and now this. "Shh, baby, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. Around her, passengers shifted, sighed, rolled their eyes. A couple phones rose, recording. Shame crawled up her spine like ice. Then a warm voice from across the aisle. "Excuse me, may I try something?" Amelia turned, startled. A man, probably mid-30s, impeccably dressed in a navy wool coat and leather gloves, sat with his hands resting calmly on his lap. His voice was calm, his eyes kind. "I've got nieces," he added with a small smile. "Sometimes a new pair of arms helps." Amelia hesitated. Life had taught her not to trust easily, not to lean on others. But Grace wouldn't stop crying, and the judgment was unbearable. Slowly, she nodded. He reached out his arms, and Amelia handed over her daughter with trembling hands. He took her like he'd done it 100 times, rocking gently, whispering something soft that Amelia couldn't hear. Within seconds, Grace's cries softened to hiccups, then to silence. Amelia stared, stunned. Her daughter curled up against a stranger like she belonged there. "She likes you," Amelia murmured. "She's warm and tired," the man replied. "That's all." The exhaustion caught up with her. Amelia's head dipped, her body surrendering. She didn't even realize she'd leaned against the man's shoulder until he gently shifted to support her. She didn't hear him remove his coat and tuck it around Grace. Didn't see the way he shielded her from the cold draft of the bus window. But she felt safe. She slept. When Amelia woke with a jolt, the bus was nearly empty. Her heart pounded as she looked up. Grace was still sleeping, nestled peacefully in the man's arms, his coat wrapped tightly around her. "Oh my God," Amelia gasped. "I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to. I must have..." He smiled, voice steady. "You were tired." "Anyone would be." Amelia swallowed, unsure what to say. No one had shown her this kind of kindness in years. Grace stirred then, blinking sleepily. "You smell like warm," she mumbled, nuzzling against his chest. He chuckled. Amelia blushed. "Her name's Grace," she said, almost shy. "I'm Julian," he replied, still holding her daughter as if she were porcelain. "Nice to meet you both." The bus slowed. "This is our stop," Amelia said, reaching for Grace. Julian handed her over gently, making sure the coat stayed wrapped around her small frame. "Thank you," Amelia said, her voice cracking. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Julian shrugged, modest. "You'd have figured it out. You're doing great." She stepped off the bus into the snow, watching as it pulled away. Through the foggy window, she caught one last glimpse of Julian's profile. Then he was gone. Holding Grace close, wrapped in a coat that wasn't hers, Amelia whispered, "We won't see him again. But he was nice, huh?" Grace murmured in her sleep. And for the first time in weeks, Amelia Carter felt a little less alone. The apartment smelled faintly of damp carpet and reheated soup. Amelia Carter pushed open the door with one shoulder balancing Grace on her hip while a plastic grocery bag dangled from her free hand. The door creaked shut behind her, and the radiator rattled like it was coughing out its last breath. Grace whimpered, rubbing her eyes. Amelia set her down gently on the threadbare couch, wrapping her in a blanket so thin it barely counted. Then she slipped off her coat and sighed long and hollow. Her feet ached, her fingers throbbed. Her hope flickered. She crossed the small room to the kitchen and opened the fridge. It offered little more than half a bottle of apple juice, a can of beans, and a few tired slices of bread. Payday was still 3 days away. The landlord's note. Final notice, rent due, glared at her from its spot on the fridge like it had teeth. She sat at the chipped table, head in hands. All week she'd been applying for second jobs, overnight janitorial shifts, Sunday kitchen work, anything. But her phone hadn't rung. Grace had come down with a cough, and daycare had sent her home early twice. The diner had cut Amelia's hours again, and now she was staring into the echo of an empty fridge, too tired to cry. But somewhere in the storm of anxiety, a strange calm surfaced. The bus, the coat. The stranger, Julian, she hadn't even asked for his last name. He hadn't asked for hers. Yet, in one of the hardest nights of her life, his shoulder had been the only place she could rest. A softness in a world that had hardened long ago. Men like him didn't cross into her life. Not really. 2 days passed. Grace's cough worsened. Amelia wrapped her in warm baths, rubbed menthol on her chest, and read stories aloud until her own voice gave out. She drank cold coffee in the mornings, ran on fumes through rainy sidewalks, and slipped into her diner apron with minutes to spare. It was a cold, wet Wednesday when the bell above the diner door jingled. Amelia was pouring burnt coffee into a chipped mug when she looked up and froze. Julian Westwood stood there, shaking the rain from his coat, scanning the room until his eyes found hers. He smiled. "Didn't expect to see you again," he said warmly. Amelia nearly dropped the coffee pot. She set it down, wiped her hands on her apron, and tried to still the thudding in her chest. "Neither did I," she said with a nervous smile. "Small city, I guess." He shrugged and looked around. "Busy today?" "Depends on the hour." "Just coffee," he said, settling into a stool at the counter. She grabbed a clean mug with trembling fingers, poured it, and slid it over. "Thanks," he said. She nodded, turned away, pretended to clean. But she could feel him watching, not in a way that unsettled her, but in a way that made her feel seen, present, human. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel invisible. The morning air was brittle, the kind that stuck to your skin, even beneath layers. Amelia Carter tugged Grace's jacket hood up and kissed her on the forehead before handing her off to the neighbor. It wasn't much of a babysitting setup, but it was all she had. The woman down the hall took what she could when she could. Sometimes out of kindness, sometimes because she owed Amelia for that one time last winter. The sidewalks shimmered with last night's rain. Amelia's shoes were still damp from the walk to the diner the day before. She moved slower this morning, mostly because Grace had finally slept through the night. That was a victory. A small, sacred one. But as she approached the diner's front door, her steps slowed. Something was hanging on the handle. A paper bag, plain brown, tied at the top with a knot, like someone had taken time. Amelia paused, looking up and down the quiet street. No one lingered nearby, just delivery trucks and early commuters with headphones in and hoods pulled tight. She reached for the bag, unhooked it from the door handle. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, she found 2 cans of infant formula, a small bottle of children's cold syrup, a tissue box with cartoon animals, and tucked gently between them, a folded note. Amelia's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. I think Grace might need these. J, just the letter. But it was enough. Her breath caught. Her chest tightened. She hadn't told Julian Grace was sick. She hadn't said anything about not being able to afford formula. How had he known? The bag weighed more now, not physically, emotionally. She stood there, the New York cold biting at her fingertips, unsure whether to feel seen or exposed. All day, the bag sat behind the counter. Amelia moved through her shift like always. Orders, trays, coffee refills. Same customers, same complaints, same tired ceiling fan ticking like it might give out at any moment. But her eyes kept drifting to that paper bag, to the formula, to the syrup, to the note signed with a single initial. What did it mean? Was it kindness? Was it charity? Or worse, was it pity? She didn't know, but it unsettled something deep inside her. So when her shift ended, she didn't go home. She waited. And at 5:30, just as the clouds broke into another miserable drizzle, the bell over the door rang again. Julian stepped in. Same coat, same quiet presence, same calm. He paused when he saw her. Her arms were folded across her chest, her stance tight. Hi, he said, unsure. We need to talk, Amelia replied, sharper than she meant it. Julian approached slowly. All right. She didn't soften. I found the bag. I hoped you would, he said simply. I didn't ask for help. No, he agreed. You didn't. Then why? Her voice cracked slightly, a mix of confusion and pride. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Julian met her gaze, steady, calm. Because I saw a woman holding the world together with both hands while everyone else pretended not to notice. He stepped closer. Because I watched you soothe a child with no sleep in your eyes, no money in your pocket, and no one on your side, and you still smiled at strangers. Amelia's throat tightened. I'm not a charity case, she whispered. I never said you were, Julian said gently. Then what am I to you? He hesitated just for a moment before answering. You're strong. You're a fighter. You're doing something most people would collapse under. I didn't leave that bag because I thought you were weak. I left it because I respect the strength it takes to survive and still choose kindness. Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. I don't know how to accept things like that, she murmured. You don't have to, he said softly. Just know it came without strings, no pity, just care. They stood in silence for a long moment, the air between them thick with things unspoken. Finally, Amelia nodded. Not a big gesture. Just enough. Julian offered a small, understanding smile, and without another word, he sat in his usual seat at the counter as if nothing had changed. But for Amelia, something had. Because for the first time in years, someone had offered help without demanding shame in return. And maybe, just maybe, that was what healing could begin to look like. The sun peeked through the bare branches of Central Park, casting a soft golden hue on the cracked sidewalks and damp benches. Spring was still weeks away, but the city seemed to exhale, just a little. It was one of those rare Saturdays when time didn't press so hard on your back. Amelia Carter hesitated at the park gate, her fingers curled tight around Grace's small hand. Julian Westwood stood waiting just inside, not in a tailored coat this time, but in jeans and a navy sweater. Casual. Approachable. Still entirely out of place among playground swings and cracked pavement. He smiled when he saw them, not the polite kind, but the kind that belonged. Good morning, he said. Grace, shy as always, hid behind her mother's leg. Say hello, Amelia whispered. Grace peeked out. Hi, she mumbled. Julian knelt, his voice gentle. "Hey there, Miss Grace, do you like ducks?" Her eyes widened a little. "There's a whole pond full of them waiting," he said, extending a hand. After a beat, she took it. Amelia's chest ached at the sight, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. They walked the winding path slowly. Grace clung to Julian's hand for a while, uncertain. But eventually, she loosened her grip and started skipping ahead, her curls bouncing with each step. Amelia stayed close behind, arms folded, heart on guard. They passed the playground, where kids yelled joyfully in their Saturday freedom. Julian pointed out a squirrel scrambling across a bench. Grace laughed, and for once, Amelia let herself listen to the sound. They found an empty bench by the duck pond. Julian sat on one side, Amelia on the other, with Grace nestled between them, holding a biscuit in one hand and her worn stuffed rabbit in the other. The pond shimmered in the soft light. A few ducks drifted lazily by, unconcerned with the world. "You come here often?" Julian asked, leaning back. Amelia shook her head. "Not really. Only when I don't have to choose between subway fare and groceries." He glanced sideways. "You seem more rested today." She gave a small laugh. Looks can be deceiving. Silence settled between them, easy but charged. Grace hummed to herself, tracing tiny shapes on the bench slats with a biscuit crumb. Then Amelia spoke. "Her father left when I was 3 months pregnant," she said, eyes still on the water. "Said I ruined his life, that he wasn't ready to be a dad." Julian didn't speak. He didn't interrupt. Just listened. "My mom helped at first. She was my only support." "But she died before Grace turned one. Cancer, quick!" "Mean." Her voice trembled. "After that, it was just me. Working. Hustling, juggling rent and diapers and night shifts, pretending I had it all together when I barely had anything." Julian's jaw tensed. "There were nights," she continued, "when Grace would cry, and I'd hold her until she stopped. But I didn't stop. I'd cry into her hair and hope she never noticed." Still, Julian stayed quiet. "I stopped trusting people," Amelia added. "Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Every time I opened that door, someone walked out." Grace crawled into her mother's lap, curling up like she used to when she was a baby. Amelia kissed the top of her head. Julian looked out at the water for a long time. Then he said quietly, "My mom raised me alone too." Amelia turned to him, surprised. "One-bedroom apartment in the Bronx," he continued. "She worked 3 jobs. I remember nights she'd sleep on the floor so I could have the bed. She never complained, not once." He paused. "She once sold her winter coat so I could go to a school dance. I didn't find out until years later. I asked her why she didn't just say something. She shrugged and said, 'It wasn't that cold that week.'" Amelia smiled, a sad, tender smile. Julian looked at her. "I know what it's like to be broke. To feel small because of a number in your bank account. But I also know what love looks like. And I saw it the night you held Grace like she was your whole world, even when yours was falling apart." Her eyes welled up. Julian added, "That kind of love? That's not common. That's what stays." They sat in silence again. Grace, now dozing slightly, let the biscuit drop. Her stuffed rabbit fell into Julian's lap. He didn't flinch. He just picked it up and brushed it off gently. It was frayed, missing an ear. Held together by years and thread. "Looks like he's been through a lot," he said. Amelia nodded. "Like his owner," Julian smiled. He stood and walked toward a nearby vendor stand. "Wait here," he said. Minutes later, he returned with a small paper bag. From inside, he pulled out a plush teddy bear, soft, golden, and slightly lopsided. It looked almost exactly like Grace's old rabbit. Julian knelt in front of her and whispered, "For you." Grace blinked sleepily, then reached out and hugged the new bear. She didn't let go of the old one. She simply tucked them together, one under each arm. Amelia stared at him. "How did you?" I noticed hers was falling apart, he said quietly. So I found one that might help her hold on a little longer. Amelia didn't speak. She couldn't. Because in that moment, in that gesture, she saw something she hadn't seen in a long, long time. A man who didn't just show up. A man who stayed. The sun filtered through the large diner windows, casting slanted rectangles of light across the worn linoleum floor. The lull between lunch and dinner rush gave Amelia Carter a rare moment to breathe. She wiped down the counter with practiced rhythm, more out of habit than necessity. Grace was at home with the neighbor, finally over her cold. Amelia had packed her daughter's lunch with a little heart-shaped note and kissed her goodbye twice. For once, the day hadn't started in a panic. The bell over the door chimed softly. Amelia looked up. Julian Westwood stepped inside, but this time he wasn't in a suit. Just a sweater and dark jeans. Clean, neat, but humble. Almost like he didn't want to stand out, and still did. "You're early," Amelia said, setting the cloth aside. "I figured I'd catch you before the dinner crowd," he replied, sliding into his usual seat at the far end of the counter. There was something different about his posture. Not nervous, but thoughtful. Purposeful. Amelia poured him a cup of black coffee, just as she always did, and set it in front of him. "Thanks," he murmured. She nodded, then leaned on the counter, trying to read his eyes. "What's on your mind?" Julian hesitated for a beat. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small, folded pamphlet. He slid it across the counter. Amelia picked it up. The cover read, "Phoenix Haven, Rebuilding Lives with Dignity." "I opened my third center last month," Julian began, voice even. "We provide support for single mothers, housing, job training, legal aid, on-site childcare. It started small. Now it's growing faster than I ever imagined." Amelia kept flipping through the pamphlet. Smiling faces. Testimonials. Hope. Julian leaned forward slightly. "We're looking for someone who understands the women we serve. Someone who's walked the fire and still stands. I want you to join us full-time as a coordinator." Her hands froze on the page. "Me?" "You," Julian said simply. She blinked. I don't have a degree in social work. I've never managed anything except shifts at a diner." "You have everything they need," he said. "You're strong, you're patient, you listen. And more importantly, you lead without trying to." Amelia let out a sharp exhale. "Why me?" He met her eyes. "Because I believe in you. And because I've seen what you're capable of even when the world was pushing you down." The room around her blurred for a second. "You're offering me a job," she said carefully, "because I'm a charity case." Julian didn't flinch. "No. I'm offering you a job because you're the kind of person I'd trust to run the place if I vanished tomorrow." She shook her head. "This doesn't make sense. You could hire anyone." "People with credentials, experience. I have people like that," he replied, "but they haven't lived it like you have. They don't know what it's like to wonder if there's enough formula left until payday, or what it means when the daycare calls you at 2 p.m. and you can't leave your shift." He paused. "They haven't held a sick child and still shown up to work smiling at strangers." Amelia crossed her arms. "I didn't ask for this." "I know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm offering it, not giving it. There's a difference." She looked away. "It still feels like a handout." Julian was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, resting his arms on the counter. "Amelia," he said gently, "I didn't walk into that bus to fix someone. I wasn't looking for a cause. I was tired, like you. And then I saw you, holding your daughter with every ounce of strength you had left. You weren't waiting for someone to save you. You were surviving, and loving, and pushing through." She didn't say anything. "I'm not trying to rescue you," he added. "I'm asking you to help me build something better because I can't do it alone. And because I think you know how." Her throat tightened. She tried to speak, but her voice caught. Julian stood, smoothing the front of his sweater. Think about it, he said quietly. Take your time. He pulled a business card from his wallet and tucked it beside the pamphlet. You already have what it takes. You just need to believe it too. Then he walked out, no pressure, no big farewell. Just quiet footsteps fading into the street. That night, Amelia lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Grace breathed softly beside her. The little bear Julian had given her tucked under one arm, the worn rabbit under the other. Amelia thought about Phoenix Haven. She thought about the years of working double shifts, hiding her tears in the bathroom, pretending she wasn't falling apart. And she thought about what it would mean to lead something that could actually change someone else's story. Someone like her. Her fingers drifted over the pamphlet still sitting on the nightstand. Maybe she wasn't ready. But maybe ready wasn't the point. Maybe all she needed to do was say yes. The rain had been falling non-stop since dusk. Cold, relentless sheets of it drummed against the windows of Amelia Carter's small apartment, blurring the streetlights and swallowing the sounds of the city. Inside, the air was thick with worry. Grace was curled up on the couch, her tiny body shivering under two thin blankets. Her cheeks were flushed, her lips dry. A thermometer on the coffee table blinked red, 102.7. Amelia sat beside her, holding a damp washcloth in one hand and her phone in the other. The urgent care clinic had closed early because of flooding. The pharmacy said delivery would take hours. Her neighbor didn't answer. The diner. They hung up when she called to beg off her morning shift. She was out of options. She scrolled to the contact that read Julian. Her thumb hovered. She told herself no, she could manage. She always did. Then Grace whimpered in her sleep, her breath shallow and uneven. Amelia pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring. "Julian," she said, her voice shaking. "She's burning up." I don't know what to do." "I'm on my way," he said. "Stay with her. Don't move." "I'll be there in 15. Exactly 15 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Amelia opened it to find Julian soaked to the bone. Rain plastered his hair to his forehead. In one hand, he held a paper bag from a 24-hour pharmacy. In the other, a small pot wrapped in a towel. He stepped inside without a word and set everything on the kitchen counter. "Fever reducer, electrolytes, cough syrup," he said as he pulled off his coat. "And this," he uncovered the pot, "is ginger porridge. My grandmother swore by it." Amelia's eyes welled, but she blinked the tears away. "You really came?" "Of course I did," he said simply, walking over to the couch. Grace stirred, her eyelids fluttering open. Julian knelt beside her, brushing the damp curls from her forehead. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered. "Rough night, huh?" She blinked up at him with glassy eyes. "Let's try this medicine," he said softly. "Then I'll tell you the best story you've ever heard." Amelia watched in silence as he coaxed Grace to drink the syrup, gently spooned in a few sips of water, then wrapped her back up in the blanket. When her breathing began to slow, Julian pulled out a dog-eared copy of Corduroy from the toy bin, the only book Grace insisted on keeping near. He read in a low, steady voice. His voice filled the room like warmth, like comfort. When Grace finally drifted off to sleep, Julian tucked the blanket under her chin and stood. Amelia was still frozen in the doorway, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. "That's usually when people need someone the most," he replied. She shook her head. "I don't know how to do this. Be cared for." Julian looked at her. Really looked. "All my life," she said, "people left. Grace's father, my mother, friends. Every time I needed someone, they disappeared. So I stopped expecting anything." She choked on the last word. Her tears finally spilled over. Julian crossed the room slowly and placed a hand on her arm. "You don't have to do this alone anymore," he said gently. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I know." A soft voice called from the couch. "Mommy?" Amelia rushed over. "Yes, baby, I'm right here." Grace reached out, but not for her. Her little arms stretched toward Julian. If you were a pillow, she mumbled, still half asleep, I'd never want to let go. Julian chuckled softly, pulling her close, letting her rest her cheek against his shoulder. Amelia stood beside them, speechless. He looked up at her. I'm not going anywhere, he said. You and Grace, you're home now. My home. Amelia stared at him, tears streaming freely down her cheeks. Julian reached out, offering his hand. This time, she didn't pull away. And in that moment, quiet, unpolished, real, she let herself believe it, let herself rest, let herself trust. He leaned in slowly, gently, and kissed her. It wasn't flashy or rushed, it was soft. Sure, the kind of kiss that tells a lifetime's worth of unspoken things. When they pulled apart, Amelia rested her forehead against his. I don't know how this will work, she whispered. Then let's figure it out together, Julian said, his voice low. Outside, the rain began to ease. Inside, something else began, something soft and certain, something like love. Spring crept into the city slowly, softening the sharp winds, coaxing pale blossoms from the bare branches lining the sidewalks. The scent of thawed earth and fresh rain lingered in the air like a quiet promise. And for the first time in years, Amelia Carter didn't dread the change of season. She had said yes. Not just to Julian's help that night, but to something deeper, something scarier. She said yes to dinners that turned into warm conversations, yes to walks in Central Park with Grace perched on her shoulders, yes to answering his texts before overthinking them, yes to sitting with someone who didn't want anything but her presence. It still scared her, but it also made her feel alive again. They walked together every Saturday now. Julian in his navy coat, Grace in her tiny pink boots with sparkles on the toes, and Amelia holding both their hands like anchors against the world. That Saturday, the three of them strolled past the duck pond. Grace clung to Amelia's leg at first, shy as ever. But when Julian crouched and held out his hand offering her a crumb of bread and a quiet smile, she finally reached out and placed her small fingers in his. Amelia's heart caught. He didn't try to carry her. He didn't speak in baby talk. He simply walked beside her, step by step, as if she'd always been there. Later, they sat on a bench near the playground. Grace settled between them, content, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm, a biscuit in the other. You always come here? Julian asked. Not often, Amelia said. Only when I have enough energy to walk instead of taking the subway. You seem more rested today, she chuckled quietly. Looks can be deceiving. There was a pause. The wind rustled overhead. Then she looked down at Grace and whispered, Her father left when I was 3 months pregnant, said he wasn't ready. Said I ruined his life. Julian didn't speak. He let the words land, heavy and honest. My mom helped at first, Amelia continued. She was all I had, but she passed away before Grace turned one answer. It was quick, too quick. She reached over and tucked Grace's hair behind her ear. After that, it was just me. Rent, diapers, doctor visits, job hunting. There were nights I'd hold her while she cried, pretending I wasn't crying too. Julian's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I stopped trusting people, she admitted. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. Grace leaned against her now, humming softly. Julian looked toward the water. My mom raised me alone too, he said quietly. 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. She worked 3 jobs. I remember nights she'd sleep on the floor so I could have the bed. Amelia turned to him slowly. She never told me we were poor, he said. She just smiled and said, It's not that cold this week, when I asked why she didn't wear her coat. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in memory. Then Julian added, I know what it's like. To hear people tell you you won't make it. To feel small because of a number in your bank account. But I also know love when I see it. And I saw it that night, in the way you held Grace. Amelia blinked back tears. I've been lucky, she said. Julian smiled. No, you've been strong. As the afternoon light faded, Julian stood and walked toward a small vendor near the playground. He returned a few minutes later, holding a brown paper bag. He knelt in front of Grace and pulled out a small teddy bear, soft, with one ear slightly bent. It looked nearly identical to her ragged old rabbit. "For you," he said gently. Grace stared wide-eyed. Then slowly she reached out and took it. Amelia was stunned. "How did you?" "I noticed hers was falling apart," Julian said. "Thought she could use a friend." Grace hugged the new bear tightly, but didn't let go of the old one. She simply nestled them together on her lap. Amelia looked at Julian, her voice trembling. "No one's ever done anything like that." "Not for her. Not for me." Julian shrugged, almost sheepish. "Maybe it's time someone did." And in that quiet moment, surrounded by pigeons and laughter, Amelia felt something shift inside her. Not the flutter of a crush or the comfort of relief, but the deep, resonant hum of trust, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that stays. The diner was quiet, caught in that rare lull between the lunch crowd and the early dinner rush. The hum of the fridge blended with the soft clink of coffee cups being stacked behind the counter. Amelia Carter wiped down the laminated menus for the third time, more out of habit than necessity. Grace was with the neighbor today, finally over her cold, and for once, Amelia could breathe. Then the bell above the door jingled. Julian stepped inside, not in his usual tailored coat, but in a soft sweater and jeans. Casual. Unassuming, yet still carrying that quiet presence that made her heart skip a beat. "You're early," she said, setting her cloth aside. "I figured I'd catch you before the crowd," he replied, taking his usual seat at the counter. There was something different in his eyes today, not nervousness, but intention. Amelia sensed it before he even reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a slim, folded pamphlet and placed it between them. The title read, "Harbor House, a safe port for mothers and children." "We opened our third center last month," Julian began, his tone calm but serious. "We provide housing assistance, job training, childcare support, legal aid, anything that helps single mothers stabilize their lives." Amelia blinked. He continued, "It's grown faster than we expected. We're at the point where we need leadership. People who understand what it means to walk through the fire." She swallowed hard. "And you want me?" she asked, her voice almost incredulous. "I do." "Why?" Julian didn't hesitate. "Because you've lived it. You know what it feels like to count pennies for formula, to fall asleep standing, to hold a child while trying to hold it all together. You don't just survive, Amelia. You carry others with you. That's what Harbor House needs." Amelia took a step back. Her fingers brushed the counter's edge, grounding herself. "I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll think about it," Julian said gently. She stared at the pamphlet. "Why me?" "Why now?" He leaned in, eyes never leaving hers. "Because I believe in you. And because I've seen you in the toughest moments, wiping your daughter's tears while hiding your own." "You didn't ask for anything, Amelia. That's exactly why I trust you with everything." She crossed her arms. A familiar tension rose in her chest. That old fear of owing someone, of being someone's charity case. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly. "I know," Julian replied. "That's why I'm offering, not giving." "There's a difference." She shook her head. "It still feels like pity." "It's not. It feels like I'm your good deed of the month." Julian's expression shifted, not hurt, not defensive, just honest. "Amelia," he said, his voice low, "I didn't step in because I thought you were weak. I stepped in because I saw your strength, and I knew it deserved more than struggle. I offered you this because I believe you can lead. Because I saw leadership in you before you even saw it in yourself." Amelia looked down. Then he said, "I grew up with a mother who was exactly where you are now. She worked nights, gave up her meals, She never told me we were poor. She just loved me harder. And the world judged her, looked right past her. He took a breath. But she never let that stop her. Amelia's eyes welled. Her throat tightened. I remember, he said, watching her sleep on the floor so I could have the bed. And when I saw you on that bus, holding your daughter, barely awake, still smiling at strangers, I saw her. There was silence. A long, soft, powerful silence. Finally, Julian leaned forward, his voice quiet. I'm not trying to save you, Amelia. I'm asking you to join me, not because you need me, but because I need someone like you. Her breath caught. The room felt too small, too full. She didn't speak right away. Her hands trembled slightly on the counter. I can't, she said at last, barely above a whisper. Julian didn't flinch, he simply nodded. I understand. I'm not ready, she added. I don't know if I can be who you think I am. Julian's smile was soft. You already are. That night, Amelia walked home slowly. The city buzzed faintly under the glow of street lamps. Grace's hand wrapped around two of her fingers, swinging gently. The air was crisp, but her heart was warmer than it had been in years. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in a long time, a quiet question whispered inside her. What if I said yes? The rain hadn't let up since sunset. Cold sheets of it lashed against the windows of Amelia Carter's apartment, turning the city lights outside into a blurry watercolor of red, gold, and grey. Inside, the air was thick with worry. Grace lay on the couch, her cheeks flushed with fever, her tiny body restless beneath the thin blanket. Amelia sat beside her, one hand holding a damp washcloth to Grace's forehead, the other gripping her phone like a lifeline. The urgent care clinic had closed early due to the flooding. The pharmacy was backed up, promising a delivery time of at least 3 hours. Her neighbor didn't pick up. Her boss at the diner answered only to snap, "If you can't make your morning shift, don't bother coming in at all," before hanging up. Grace whimpered. Her breath came in shallow puffs. Amelia's chest tightened. She stared at her daughter, overwhelmed by the helplessness clawing at her. Then, without giving herself time to hesitate, she did something she hadn't done in years. She called someone. Julian answered on the first ring. "Amelia?" Her voice cracked. "It's Grace. She's really sick. Her fever won't go down. I don't know what to do." "I'm coming," he said, cutting her off gently. "Stay with her." "I'll be there soon." She stared at her phone after the call ended, then turned back to her daughter. 15 minutes later, a knock came at the door. When she opened it, Julian stood there, rain-soaked from head to toe, holding a plastic pharmacy bag in one hand and a small pot in the other. "I stopped at the late-night pharmacy," he said as he stepped inside, dripping water on the floor, fever reducer, electrolyte powder, and a ginger rice porridge the woman at the counter swore would help. Amelia blinked at him. "You really came?" Julian gave a half-smile, setting the items on the table. "Of course I came." He knelt beside Grace, brushing her damp curls from her forehead. "Hey, sweetheart," he whispered. "Rough night, huh?" Grace stirred weakly. "Let's try some medicine," Julian said softly. "Then I'll tell you the best story you've ever heard." Amelia sat in silence as he cradled her daughter in his lap, coaxing her to take the medicine with gentle words and infinite patience. When Grace's eyelids began to flutter closed, Julian reached for a worn storybook on the side table and began to read aloud, his voice steady and warm, like a fire on a stormy night. Amelia couldn't look away. When Grace finally fell asleep, her breathing slowed to a soft rhythm. Julian tucked her in, then turned to the kitchen and quietly reheated the porridge. "She can eat in the morning, sir," he said, ladling it into a bowl and covering it with foil. Amelia stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. "It's the middle of the night." Julian shrugged, putting the bowl in the fridge. That's when people need someone the most. She stepped forward. Her voice trembled. I don't know how to do this. Be cared for. Julian turned to face her, eyes calm and kind. All my life, she said. People have left. Grace's father, my mum, friends. Every time I needed someone, they disappeared, so I stopped expecting anything. It hurts less that way. Tears slid down her cheeks before she could stop them. Julian crossed the room slowly and placed a hand gently on her arm. You don't have to do this alone anymore, he said. I'm scared, she admitted. I know. A soft voice piped up from the couch. Mommy? Amelia rushed over. Yes, baby, I'm here. But Grace wasn't reaching for her. Her arms stretched toward Julian instead, wrapping around his neck as he knelt beside the couch. If you were a pillow, Grace mumbled sleepily, I'd never want to let go. Julian chuckled softly and pulled her close. Then, still holding Grace, he looked up at Amelia. I'm not going anywhere, he said. You and Grace. You're my home now. Amelia stared at him, lips parted, her tears falling freely. He reached out for her hand. She didn't pull away. In that small, quiet moment, no grand speeches, no promises, no flash of light, he leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle. Sure, full of every word they hadn't said out loud. When they parted, Amelia rested her forehead against his. I don't know how this will work, she whispered. Julian smiled. Then we figure it out together. Outside, the rain began to ease. Inside, something new had begun, soft and certain. The kind of love that didn't announce itself with fireworks, but arrived like dawn after a long night. Spring arrived quietly that year. No fanfare, no grand reveal, just a slow softening of the wind, tiny buds on trees that refused to give up, and morning sun that stayed a little longer each day. For the first time in years, Amelia Carter felt herself breathe. Really breathe. Not just survive. Not just endure, but exist in the warmth of something new. She had said yes. Not just to love, but to herself, to the job, to the cause, to something bigger than survival. She'd joined Phoenix Haven as a coordinator, stepping into a role that let her guide, uplift, and stand beside women who reminded her of her past self, exhausted, unseen, yet holding the weight of the world. She helped organize daycare schedules, wrote job training curriculums, hosted community nights. Her days were long and messy, but they mattered. And when the day ended, she didn't return home alone. Grace now ran into Julian's arms as naturally as her own. Their little apartment became something brighter, warmer, filled with dance parties, soup-stained artwork, and laughter. Together, Julian and Amelia launched their most ambitious project yet, an affordable housing development tailored for single mothers. It would offer safe living spaces, built-in childcare, wellness support, and a place where no woman ever had to feel invisible again. It was Amelia's idea to name it Grace's Garden. For her, she told Julian, as they walked the construction site one afternoon, boots crunching over gravel. Because she's the reason I'm still standing. Julian squeezed her hand. For both of you, he said, but mostly for her. Because she gave you your strength and you gave it to me. Weeks passed. The building neared completion. Amelia flourished. Her confidence grew with each decision she made, each woman she stood beside. She wore her badge like armor and walked hallways once filled with hesitation with the grace of a leader. Then one evening, while helping Grace color on the office floor, she went to Julian's desk to grab a folder and saw something she hadn't expected. An email. She hadn't meant to snoop, but the subject line had caught her eye. Executive offer. Westworth Global, London branch. Her eyes scanned the message. A position as CEO, a multi-million-dollar contract, a life he had once dreamed of. And the date? 3 months ago. It had already been declined. Her breath caught. That night, as they walked home beneath street lamps swaying in the breeze, she tried to shake it off, but the words burned inside her. "You turned down that job," she said quietly, watching him from the corner of her eye. Julian glanced at her and nodded. "I did." Her steps slowed. "That was everything, power, money, prestige. Why?" He stopped walking, then turned to face her. "Because I already have everything I want," her voice cracked. "You gave up all that? For me?" Julian stepped closer. "Not for you." "Because of you." She stared, unsure. "You reminded me of who I am," he said softly. "You showed me what really matters. Not shareholders, not corner offices, but people, family, purpose." He cupped her face in both hands. "You, Grace, this life, we're building something real. Something lasting. I'd give up 1,000 offers for that." And in that moment, Amelia believed him. Because this wasn't just a love story, it was a homecoming. A few weeks later, Grace's garden opened its doors. The courtyard buzzed with music and laughter. Families gathered under white canopy tents. Volunteers passed out juice boxes and sandwiches. Balloons bobbed in the breeze. At the podium, Amelia stood in a cream dress that fluttered in the wind, her voice steady as she faced the crowd. "I used to believe I was invisible," she began, "that because I was a single mum scraping by, my story didn't matter." She looked down at the first row at Grace on Julian's lap, waving shyly. "But then someone reminded me that strength isn't silence, that motherhood is not a limitation, it's a superpower." Applause rippled through the crowd. "I stand here today not because I was rescued," she continued, her voice thickening, "but because someone saw my worth when I couldn't. And now, it's my mission to help other women see theirs." The applause swelled. Amelia stepped back, eyes shining. Then Julian walked forward. "Before you all go," he said, his smile a mix of nerves and certainty, "there's one more thing I need to ask." He turned to Amelia, dropped to one knee. Gasps and cheers erupted. From his pocket, he pulled out a simple, elegant ring. "Amelia Carter," he said, voice trembling, "you gave me more than love. You gave me purpose. You gave me grace. You gave me hope. And you gave me a future." He looked up, eyes glistening. "Will you marry me?" Amelia's hands flew to her mouth. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Julian." The crowd erupted. Grace ran up, squealing, "We're a forever family now." A few weeks later, they held a small wedding in Central Park. Emma scattered petals in a white dress. Amelia walked toward Julian in a simple lace gown. They exchanged vows under a canopy of soft sunlight and wind-tousled leaves. Their kiss was quiet, but it carried the sound of every door once closed now opening. That evening, the three of them sat on a blanket beneath a sycamore tree, the sky glowing in streaks of gold and coral. "Do you think sunsets ever get tired?" Grace asked, her head on Amelia's lap. Amelia smiled. "No, baby. They just take turns with the moon." Julian reached for Amelia's hand. And together, they watched the day fade not with fear of night, but with hope for morning. Because they weren't just surviving anymore. They were home. Forever. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness leave the deepest marks. Amelia Carter's story reminds us that strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up even when no one sees the effort. For many older viewers who've lived through hardship, loss, or loneliness, her journey is a quiet affirmation that being seen, truly seen, can be life-changing. Julian didn't save Amelia, he simply noticed her. And in doing so, he reminded us all that compassion doesn't have to be grand to be meaningful. A borrowed shoulder on a crowded bus, a warm coat wrapped around a child, a gesture without expectation. These are the moments that restore faith in humanity. If you've spent years being the strong one for everyone else, Know this. You deserve kindness too. You deserve rest, renewal, and a love that doesn't ask you to prove your worth. No matter your age, it's never too late to begin again, and sometimes, all it takes is one person to believe in you before you start believing in yourself.